Okay, so let's address the matter that started all this shit. Police brutality, specifically toward black people. On April 22nd, 2015, I posted a video on my YouTube channel. It was entitled, Why Most Cops Are Bad Cops. In that video, I made it perfectly clear that I don't believe most cops commit bad acts. I offered that probably no more than 10 to 20% of cops actually commit bad acts. Now you may quibble with the numbers, but the point is that I believe that the number of cops who commit bad acts is relatively small. What makes most cops bad is the fact that at least half of them, who themselves do not commit bad acts, are either willing to help the bad cops cover up their bad deeds or unwilling to blow the whistle on them. And as you know from that old mathematical equation thing, you have the solution on one side of the equal sign and the problem on the other. So you're either part of the problem or part of the solution. So apathy is also part of the problem. So that's what makes most of them bad. See, if you have 10% bad actors and half of 90 or 45% is added to 10%, then 55% are bad. If they have 20% bad actors and half of 80 or 40% is added to 20, then 60% are bad. And if they only have 3% bad actors and half of 97 or 48.5 is added to 3%, then 51.5% are bad. Now, of course, this only explains why it's hard to stop the bad acting cops, but not why they do bad things in the first place. Cops do bad things specifically to black people, including but not limited to killing our asses in cold-blooded murder, because one of the main historical roles of the police in America has been to keep black folk in our place, which included out of white neighborhoods. White people have historically not cared much about how police did this, just that they did it. And even though they care more now, they're conditioned to believe police, especially over the word of one or more black people. Hell, they don't even believe video evidence because of their internal conditioning that black people are inherently more violent and possess superhuman strength, making the amount of force they would deem excessive on a white person just the right amount of force for a black person, at least in the minds of too many white people. Thus, white folk have been very little help in the charging and convicting of police officers who abuse black folk. So we protest. And since we are the ones getting killed in these streets and you aren't willing to most times even indict a police officer for murdering one of us, we don't give a flying fuck about your fucking views about our treatment of our fucking national anthem. Now, at the beginning of this video, you may recall that I said that Americans' allegiance to our symbols come from our allegiance to associations in general. And I added that here, the association is our group of diverse American citizens, and that our allegiance to each other, our cohesion despite our diversity, is the cornerstone of our strength as a nation. Well, that only works if our allegiance is to the entire group of Americans and not merely to our particular demographic. When our allegiance is to our particular demographic, we participate in the destruction of our cohesion and thus the destruction of America. That's what 45 is capitalizing on. He didn't create it, but he's exploiting it. America only works when we can see each other in ourselves. Once we start thinking of certain Americans outside of our own particular group as others, the unraveling of America is set on its course. But the fact that our men in blue have an us versus them mentality isn't particular to their group. It's representative of the larger society in America and abroad. because 90% of the people in the world cling more to their associations at the expense of their own values and principles. You may not believe that, but after a while you will. For instance, I'm sure that the Pope has values and principles. I mean, according to folklore, he's Jehovah's representative on earth, so he must have principles. Among them is probably the principle that pedophilia is wrong. And yet, he will turn a blind eye to the pedophilia in his own ranks involving his own clan of priests. I'm sure the Republicans and Democrats have values and principles, but they overlook them in favor of party unity all the time. The Republican-led Congress not only pretended to investigate Russia's hacking of our 2016 elections, they allowed House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes to sabotage the hearings because of party unity, with absolutely no regard for the health and welfare of America. It's party over country, party over values and principles. White people have values and principles. They believe in the sanctity of life and principles of fair dealing. But those values take a back seat amid the fear of the so-called black menace that Hillary Rodham Clinton added fuel to with her labeling of our black youth as super predators. And even though they believe police officers go way over the line in their dealings with black people, they also see the police as protecting them from a basket of deplorables. So they jettison their values in favor of a good association with law enforcement. And even though Hillary Clinton did more to buttress the notion of a black menace in America than any presidential candidate in recent memory, those bitch-ass members of the Congressional Black Caucus who endorsed her did so by ignoring both their own values and the needs of their constituencies in favor of a good association with the Democratic Party. Members of fraternities and sororities are typically founded on certain values and principles, but the principle looming the largest is the notion of frat soror over everything else. Hell, even the average Joe will have a very strong feeling about being his neighbor's keeper as a matter of principle, and disregard that same principle when a friend has done wrong to a neighbor he hardly knows. So unfortunately, the police problem in America is systemic of the clannish mentality that is so pervasive in America and around the globe. If only we could widen the group of 10%ers, those very few who hold their values and principles high above any material gain, notoriety, applause of peers, and yes, allegiance to any group. For instance, I've never had much use at all for any Republican, but I've always had the utmost respect for the late John McCain because he was a 10%er just like me. When a woman on the campaign trail tried to paint his presidential rival as an Arab, John McCain took the mic and corrected the situation. He simply wasn't a win-at-all-costs kind of guy. It had to be done the right way. He was a man of principle. And I can imagine that he was raised hearing some of the same words my mother seemed to drill into my head every day. She'd say, right is right and wrong is wrong. That's it. There were no qualifying circumstances, and I was to strive to do the right thing no matter what the damn cost. This was the same sentiment expressed by the mayor, portrayed by Ossie Davis when he gave Spike Lee's character, Mookie, the word of the day. The word, which ended up as the title of the movie, was do the right thing. Remember the words, to thine own self be true? Somehow I'm led to believe that this admonition is more about being true to one's principles and values than to any association. I belong to the same fraternity as Martin Luther King Jr., Andrew Young, Cornel West, and more notable black Americans than time would permit me to list. I am an Alpha man, member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, proud of it too. I pledged while I was in law school, and I recall an incident where one of the undergraduate alphas thought it was okay to punch a pledge in the testicles. I didn't like it, and I called the national president, who was also president of a prestigious university at the time. I reported it and didn't give a damn what the local chapter thought about it. I also recall Andy Young's comments about Obama when Hillary was running against him. Young was supporting Hillary, and he offered that you get Bill along with Hillary in a package deal. Then he had the unmitigated gall to say that Bill Clinton was blacker than Barack Obama because he had slept with more black women than Barack. As if the barometer for blackness is the number of black vaginas a man has dipped his penis into. I wrote an article on my blog at the time where I dubbed him Andy Sellout Young, and I didn't give a flying fuck that he is my frat. I've never taken the article down, and I'll provide a link in the description to it below. But this is why I loved the Maverick. We had different viewpoints, but we're cut from the same cloth. If only we had more 10%ers like John McCain, this country, this world, would be a much better place. So in the end, most cops are bad for the exact same reason that most people are bad people. And they aren't bad people because of direct bad deeds. They're bad because they're part of the problem and not the solution. The Pope may not have molested anyone. Only a few cops have murdered black people and others. Few members of fraternities and sororities have committed atrocities. Few Republicans commit treason by giving comfort and aid to a foreign enemy. Few Democrats label black folk as menace to society. Few white folk are racist. But the clannish mentality pervasive in all of these groups make the group itself an enabler for the atrocities of the few. And until we have more men and women of nobility and honor, like John McCain and Colin Kaepernick, who incidentally was dubbed for a new Nike Just Do It campaign, the atrocities continue. The Nike campaign features a number of athletes, but the caption over Kaepernick's part is reported to read, "Believe in something even if it means sacrificing everything." This is why I love John McCain in with Colin Kaepernick. John also arguably sacrificed the presidency when he made the decision not to run on the politics of fear of the black man with the Arabic name. We need to honor men like these two more while they live, instead of saving the highest praises we have for them in death. We love Nike for sticking up for what's right. Well, at least the enlightened among us do anyway. ESPN sports reporter Israel Gutierrez is one of the enlightened. On the ESPN show, Highly Questionable, he made a point of saying that the Nike campaign would prompt some people to educate themselves about the cause that Kaepernick represents with his protest. That was good. But in that same correspondence, he made a probably innocent misrepresentation that I'm going to have to address. He offered that Nike, quote unquote, could have gone patriotic with their campaign, but instead chose to, quote unquote, do this. The problem is that he inferred that both the route Kaepernick took and Nike's support of his stand, or kneel, isn't the patriotic route. So it's important that we all understand that although devotion to country and reverence of cherished symbols are methods of expressing patriotism, there are other methods. Another form of patriotism, and you can Google it if you don't believe me, is showing devotion to the welfare of one's compatriots, that is, fellow citizens. Now let's face facts. Only an idiot would opine that the symbols that represent a country have more value than the citizens those symbols represent. Both Colin Kaepernick and Nike are expressing a higher form of patriotism because American citizens are the true representation of America and not her symbols. Likewise, Christians practice a much higher form of Christianity by devotion to their fellow men and women than by exalting a fucking cross. Muslims practice a much higher form of Islam by caring for fellow Muslims than by devotion to the damn crescent moon. Catholics practice a much higher form of Catholicism when they move to protect rank and file Catholic children from pedophile priests than they do by venerating the Pope, who also is nothing more than a freaking symbol. And that's because love is what love does, and not what the fuck it professes. Hell, I recall the Christian Bible's admonition that faith without works is dead. And here we have the leader of our country, reported to have the understanding of an elementary school student, expressing his preference for acts representing blind faith versus actual works. I also recall your same Bible making this stand: show me thy faith without works, and I'll show you my faith by my works. Again, like my mom used to always tell me, love is what love does. So because true patriots concern themselves with the welfare of their compatriots, as long as the atrocities continue against our compatriots, our protests will continue. Because for true patriots, the health and welfare of all of you, my fellow Americans who bleed and die, will always take precedence over symbols that don't bleed and don't die. And because the scale has lost innocent lives on the one side and your feelings on the other side, please forgive us for making the decent and honorable choice of saying, fuck your motherfucking feelings. Get the fuck over it. Now, it is my desire to end this thing on a positive note, suggesting a couple of projects that all Americans ought to be able to support regardless of your demographics and politics. But first we have to address our woefully unqualified racist president and the bitch-ass motherfuckers that enable him. We must correct the mistake we made by electing him. We must vote out all Republican congressmen who lack the testicular fortitude to stand up to him, who wouldn't even pass legislation to protect Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller from being fired because they have placed party loyalty above the well-being of the country. This definitely includes both party leaders in the House and the Senate, Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell, but many of their fellow Republican congressmen and congresswomen, like Devin Nunes, are equally to blame. For all whom the shoe fits, I want to make it very, very plain. I have absolutely no respect for you nasty, dirty, dog dick motherfuckers, no matter what your fucking title is, because you have done the unforgivable. You nasty ass fuckers have forsaken your own country in favor of party loyalty. And if I ever see one of you vile, vicious fuckers, I will be sure to express the same to your goddamn fuck faces. You bitches aren't worthy of respect, and you will never, ever get it from me. Now, even though I have always leaned toward the Democratic Party, the fact is also that I have always simply viewed them as the lesser of two evils. Both parties have always catered to the elite, the 6% who staffed the initial government and still control the country. but they simply use different methodologies. In short, we get fucked by both. Democrats just tend to use a little lube, and Republicans tend to dry fuck us. Thus, the election of Democrats this fall is only the solution to our present problem. Long term, we have to force the inclusion of other parties on all debates. I agree with Jesse Ventura's assessment that both are nothing but gangs, whose primary allegiance is to their respective gang. I thus agree with his renaming them as Democrats and Republicans. But we need to address this larger issue after the midterms, because Donald Treason Trump is the greatest threat to the American way of life since Richard Nixon, and 45 is 10 times, maybe 20 times worse. Now, the last thing before the positive ending. I know that 45's dirt diggers will be scouring the internet for anything to attack and defame me instead of attacking what I said in this video. I mean, it's your only recourse. When you can't effectively attack the message, you instead attack the messenger. I mean, come on, isn't that what 45's been doing ever since he's been in office? And even when he was on the campaign trail. The most damning thing that they'll be able to uncover will probably be this headline. Howard E. Barrett Jr. calls for the death of the president. And you know what? That headline would be true. I have been calling for the death of Donald Treason Trump ever since I became convinced that he was guilty of betraying America, or mere months after his election. But here's the caveat. I have always called for the government to kill his bitch ass, and have expressly warned any citizen against doing what is solely within the purview of the federal government. I further make sure it's widely known that I think that anyone who takes the law into their own hands and kills this dumb fuck is just as fucking dumb as he is. Long story short is that I'll never tell anyone to do what I'm unwilling to do myself. Killing that fucker isn't worth my life and my freedom, and anyone who thinks it would be worth it would be deserving of execution himself should he follow through. All minds clear on that? Okay. Now instead, me, as a law school graduate, I stand on the law of the land, the law of the country that I love. Of the same country that our president has betrayed. Now think about those words. Our president has betrayed our country. I never thought in a million years that such a thing was even plausible. But here we are. The Constitution defines the crime of treason, but doesn't determine the penalty. The penalty is outlined in the U.S. Code, Title 18, Part 1, Chapter 115, Section 2381, and it reads, Whosoever, owing allegiance to the United States, levies war against them, or adheres to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort within the United States or elsewhere, is guilty of treason and shall suffer death, or shall be imprisoned not less than 5 years and fined under this title but not less than $10,000, and shall be incapable of holding any office under the United States. Now, why would you call for death, Howard, when that's kind of like the highest punishment that could be received? Why would you go for that? Well, let's look at what prosecutors do every time one of my black brethren are on trial for anything for which the death penalty would be appropriate. Every time that happens, they always seek the death penalty against my black brethren. And since the penalty for whatever Trump's constituency thought that Hillary Clinton was guilty of was imprisonment, didn't they always chant, lock her up, lock her up? Well, the penalty for what he's guilty of is death. So I say, come on, federal government, kill him, kill him. Okay. By the way, regardless of any Justice Department memo purporting to establish a policy that a sitting president can't be indicted, it's bogus bullshit, and here's why. The clear constitutional intent for the three branches of government is that they be three equal branches that provide checks and balances upon each other. If all three are equally important, it stands to reason that they be treated equally relative to criminal liability. Now, since we have already indicted, convicted, and incarcerated numerous sitting congressmen from the branch that creates our laws, we likewise can and should do the same when there is probable cause that a president or a justice from the branches that enforce and judge our laws has broken a law. In America, no man is above the law. And as my friend, the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. poignantly pointed out, justice delayed is justice denied. If we don't get 45 into an orange jumpsuit while he's in office, chances are that he'll never pay. The notion of equality of American citizenship is the cornerstone of America's democracy. And if that isn't convincing enough for you, I'll speak in the words of those Christians who falsely claim America to be a Christian nation. In your Bible, your God makes it perfectly clear that you are made in His image and thus should follow His example. Well, one of the qualities your God supposedly has is specifically stated in your word. It says that your God is not a respecter of persons. And if you dare to follow Him and be a good Christian, you won't be a respecter of persons either. Amen? Okay, back to the unity. Two things we as Americans, despite experiencing America very differently, ought to be able to agree with and work on together. Issue one, and this is one that is currently a mantle taken up by Senator Cory Booker. This is bail reform. The present system is undoubtedly a holdover from when the initial elites, the original 6%, enacted laws for and by the few who are rich and the rich who are few. It entails the proffering of large amounts of cash or high-valued real estate as bail, ensuring that the well-off receive bail and that the financially challenged don't. The decision to grant bail should involve only two considerations. One, the likelihood of the accused showing up for trial, with the assumption that he or she will, absent evidence to the contrary, like negative past history with the courts. The other consideration is the likelihood that he or she won't attempt to obstruct justice if bail is granted. This would include things like threatening, killing, or conspiring with witnesses and other parties to the proceedings. You know, like the type of interference that got Paul Manafort's bail revoked. If we follow this course, this way of granting a bail it would be based solely upon the likelihood or lack thereof of the accused obstructing or avoiding justice and not on his or her net worth. This way, the masses, the wretched 94%, will be able to proclaim that the American dream of an equal justice system has moved closer to the American reality for us all. And the second issue all Americans, more or at least 90% of us say, ought to be able to agree with is presidential and congressional debate reform. We ended up with 45 in the first place because, as late polls revealed, a majority of Americans wanted neither 45 nor Clinton as president. But due to the two-party control over our voting apparatus, we're steered like cattle to one party or the other, one gang or the other gang, Democrats or Republicans. The funny thing is that the most highly touted feature of our capitalist economy is the notion of unfettered industry competition that results in wide varieties of consumer choices. of products, of services, terms, and prices. So how is it that our democracy, our governmental system, features the few choices, few political parties, few platforms and agendas that are more characteristic of an oligarchical plutocracy? I guess we're just mostly gullible. Media tells us that voting outside of the two-party system is vote wasting, and belonging to a party outside of the two-party system is political time wasting. So they're no help. But forcing the Commission on Presidential Debates to include all political parties, large and small, gives us the opportunity for the same unfettered competition in politics that we demand in business. We may have to start doing this at the grassroots level of state and congressional elections first, but the momentum will carry forward and force them to do the exact same thing in presidential and vice presidential elections. This way, we will bring our democracy full circle from the time where, for the first 80 years, where 60% controlled our choices and our laws, and they themselves lived the American reality of prosperity and freedom, while selling the other 94% of us on the dream, the idea of the dream of peace and prosperity. This way, we will move farther away from the dream of an American government that actually represents us all, and closer to the reality, the American reality of representative government for us all. Now, I said earlier that I was going to burn this American flag, and I told you also that I had no particular issue with the flag. And the simple fact of the matter is that I don't. But I'm going to burn this flag for one particular reason, and that's because I live in America, and the fact that I live in America means that I can. Oh yeah, I know I told some of you that I was going to burn the flag at the end of all this. Well, the fact is, I tried on camera a couple of times, but I just couldn't. You know, I got one little small hole down there in the bottom. That was it. And the bad boy just wouldn't burn. So, you get the point?